and an MSc in Physics in Geophysics from the University of Houston in Texas. So we'd like to thank Mr. Anthony Paul for taking the time out to give this talk. And we all look forward to his insights. All right. And just one point before he starts, in case anybody has questions, feel free to type in that question in the message bar and we'll address those questions at the end. All right. So welcome, Mr. Anthony Paul.
Even though I'm not here, can you make sure I get this screen up here? Are you seeing my screen? I had it up just now.
It's loading. Yeah, we can see you.
All right, let me find. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, we see your background. Yeah.
No, the screen.
It's coming up now. Yeah.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm happy to spend some time with you. I hope this technology works well. It's a pleasure to share on anything on local content. And I think as I'll end up sharing with you, the geologists in Trinidad and Tobago and the Geological Society has a major role to play in local content. So I'll go through this. You asked me to address some questions around major successes, some major missed opportunities or failures in local content, who the regulators and policymakers are, whether our laws and guidelines are up to date, what they are, and if we were to change them, what should we change? You know, if I had a choice to do something, where would I focus my targets and quick wins? And looking at some countries who have been most successful and how they got there. I want to hit that one straight away and let people know that one of the biggest successes in local content anywhere in the world ever has been Trinidad and Tobago. But we tend to forget that, so I'll come back to that later on. And then we ask the question, given the situation today in terms of COVID and what's happening, how can Trinidad and Tobago participate in local content, or how does that help us, or can we get there? So I'll start by asking the first question, what is local content? Everybody knows, everybody has an answer. But I'll give you the definition we're using in Trinidad and Tobago. And it's actually in the Public Procurement Act as a definition. Essentially, it says, for every dollar spent, how much stays in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's reduced the definition to monetary value. And you'll see why as I go through this in a bit. Now, local content is just part of the way countries can get benefits from their resources. We're all familiar with value addition downstream, you know, so how to take raw materials and convert them into other kinds of value. And if you do this in country, it's called local value addition. You can export raw materials and simply can get a benefit, yeah? But there are other ways to get benefit, and it's knowledge transfer and technology transfer. We know the industry is very high on these knowledge and technology, what it uses, what it produces. So what a local content policy does, what ours does, it says, how can we transfer that from foreigners to locals? But more importantly, it goes on to say, how can we transfer that is available in the oil and gas sector to other sectors? And it's important because if we do that well, it means we can increase the productivity of those sectors, their competitiveness, we can reduce imports and increase exports, which is something we're trying to do across the board. So local content has a specific desire to get more locals participating in the sector. It also has a bigger value opportunity, and I'll share that with you in a bit. Are you hearing me, guys? Am I talking too quickly? I usually do.
Sounds so good so far, Tony.
Okay, good. So what is this local content and where it is? So let's imagine we had a barrel of oil, and that barrel of oil is sold. That revenue is then distributed, royalty and taxes to the government, and then all the costs that are spent have to be paid for. And of course, the company has its own costs. Most of the costs go to third parties, the ones in blue, the company's costs are in red, and then the profit, the wellhead margin is the profit. So the government share is these green pieces, the company shares this, and the company employs people. So it creates some local content, it buys services, and, you know, it uses some services internally, it spends some money on CSR, but most of the money is spent on third parties. And if you consider it, governments only get taxes after profits are made. Profits only occur when costs are paid. We know that for several years, some of the big companies have been paying no taxes but they were earning revenue. So somebody made that money. Now, the basis for people going after local content is that actually this barrel is actually the people's barrel, and this barrel pays for all these services. So the country pays those services. And what local content is saying is, if I'm paying for this, should I get some benefit from it? Or how can I get some benefit from it? That's what we see in country. Now, this is interesting because in addition to that benefit from actually locals getting hired or getting contracts and money staying in the country, the government can also tax these companies who are working in country. And our laws provide for that, that anybody working in the oil and gas sector should be registered, should be licensed. And if you're licensed, you must have an office locally and, of course, be liable for taxes. That, I'm afraid, doesn't happen. So a lot of revenue is lost through not having local content and laws to support them implementing. But this happens in country. In LNG, which is our biggest source of value, a lot of activities actually happen out of country. So we don't actually typically get a chance to get local content in there. But there's no reason we can't. There's, the opportunities for state and local companies to participate down the value chain, which we haven't pursued, but there are opportunities. So essentially, local content is revenue earned from participating in the value chain, providing services to oil and gas companies. That revenue is earned either through employment or through providing goods and services. And that happens in the upstream, it happens in the midstream, in the downstream, and then there's the value addition, which I mentioned, taking raw material and producing value. And we can get local content or value addition in Trinidad and Tobago's value chain. We have all the pieces to get those. So we can participate fully in the chain in country and perhaps out of country. So some of these skills we need and services we need to provide support for other different parts of the sector. Some are specific to upstream, like subsurface services, geology, geophysics. Some go downstream and midstream, like consulting, logistics, operational support, engineering. And some of those go into other sectors as well. So these ones here are the ones that, one, have a relatively long and wide lifespan, and two, can support national development in some ways. Yeah. The others can't, and I'll show you how we looked at that when we looked at the local content policy a few years ago. So I'm going through this fairly quickly because there's a lot of material here, so forgive me if I go too quickly. But we can share the slides, yeah? So local content only really happens when somebody gets employed or gets a contract. Local content policies tend to say you give locals preferential treatment, but they tend to have a catch in there where they say you give them preferential treatment, provided they meet international standards of quality, timeliness, cost, and everything else. Now, in most countries, that's a problem because you can't actually have that capability unless you practice. So at the beginning, you're not able. Trinidad, luckily, had a long history of oil and gas. It allowed us to have capability once this policy was put in place, the recent policy, and I'll give you a little history of that policy development. So to get employed or get a contract, you must have the capacity as people or as businesses. Now, how do we know as a country, as people, as businesses, what skills to develop, what technology to buy, what to do? We have to analyze the industry, analyze what are the activities that are going to happen, what goods and services are involved in those activities, how many, when, for how long. So that gives you a sense of, I know what's coming, I know what it looks and feels like, but then I have to figure out what can I go after. There's a lot. A small country or any country can't do everything. So you have to make decisions, make choices as to what to do, where to focus, how to prioritize. Look at the whole suite of what's possible, and then select out of that what's desirable. But more than that, something might be desirable, but they may not be viable. They may not have a long enough lifespan. They may not be continuous. The investment may not pay for itself. So there's a lot of thought to be putting into a strategy. And once you made those choices, then you put those into a policy, which says, here are the principles by which participants will conduct their business in this sector. And that's what we did in Trinidad. Now, having done all this lovely work doesn't guarantee you employment or contract, as we know. What makes that happen is to recognize that a policy does not have the effect of law. A policy cannot stand up in court. You can't compel somebody to follow a policy. But policies are meant to help shape laws. Laws then give you the rules of engagement. And that's what makes policy work. There must be a regulatory framework. There must be laws. And laws are the rules, the regulations are really the way how these rules are implemented, and then there's a regulator who oversees its operations. So this is an important part of the implementation stages for local content, and if that doesn't happen, local content doesn't happen. So I put this up to illustrate there's a huge amount of stakeholders and activities involved in local content. Capacity building means education, it means training, it means financing, it means buying equipment. A whole load goes into that. And as you see in Trinidad's case, there's several stakeholders involved. And they have to be organized, coordinated. Somebody has to do that and make sure they're all working in cohesion. And that's where the regulator comes in. And that's where in Trinidad and Tobago, we put in place a local content committee to help coordinate that. So here's what Trinidad and Tobago set out to do. And here's what the local content policy tries to emulate. And when I say set out to do, I'll show you this didn't start in 2003 or the 1990s. This started at independence. And I'll show you what that means. So Trinidad and Tobago at independence recognized that we had some things. We have assets above the ground and below the ground, resources, people. We have markets. We can actually be a market. We have regional markets, local markets for the products that are produced from oil and gas. But what we also have is a business opportunity. Investors want resources, they want skills, they want markets. We have that. How do we use that? Well, we need some inputs. And for that, we go to investors. They bring capital, they bring technology, they bring research, they bring know-how across the value chain, project management, access to finance, procurement, negotiation skills, contract management, operations excellence, risk management, and the control systems to go with that. Talent management, marketing, trading, they bring a reputation, they can do things. A small country out of independence, we didn't have these things. We couldn't go to the market and say, please give us capital. We have resources, we think we can get it out of the ground. No, companies bring that. So what we try to do in our approach to this industry, say, we know what companies have, we know why we need them. But how can we know what they want, or we can give it to them. But can we have an exchange? Can we say, okay, fine, come, you get what you want, we can share that with you, but let's talk as partners. Let's find a way we can get from you what we need. And the reason for that is, if we were to do this well, if we had enough to offer, over time, we can become truly independent. We did not need to have everything brought every time. It's not to say we don't need investment. It's not to say we don't need new capital and technology. Far from it. It's saying we need to be less dependent on these things. And that's where the government and the country started the rule on local content back at independence. So let me share that with you. Many of you are aware of this, but in 1963, right out of independence, the government engaged a commission of inquiry. It was headed by two foreigners and a local. The two foreigners one became the head of the Iranian National Oil Company, and one became the head of the Australian National Oil Company, which is more on the refining side. So we had an upstream and a downstream person of international repute, and a local supporting them. And they were given a simple task, and this is interesting in today's world, and I'll read them out. It says, this commission is to examine the present situation and future prospects of the oil industry. It is to recommend a legal framework for the industry, which will stimulate the operations of foreign investors while safeguarding the interests of the nation, and to make recommendations to ensure the greatest possible stability compatible with growth in the industry, including the level of employment. So since then, we looked at attracting investors, making sure our interests are paramount, understanding the resource of the country and the markets internationally, and then looking at employment. And the government put some additional questions to the commission. It asked, how we address a just division of the proceeds of this national heritage, understanding that this heritage belongs to everyone. How we utilize the proceeds of the industry for the betterment of the nation as a whole. In other words, everybody benefits. What is the extent of training of nationals for further exploitation of resources in the national interest? In other words, as the foreigners go, how can we take over? Taking adequate stock of our international position in all activities in the industry, meaning this value chain out of the country. And then are the laws compatible with the aims and aspirations and the status of an independent nation pledged to a democratic form of government? That, to me, is the kicker in there. That says this government is committed to citizen participation, to transparency in this democratic form of government. And to what extent has there been a plan of development for the industry? This is for the industry. And how far has this been coordinated in the National Development Plan? And that's so key, because you're not developing the industry in isolation, you're developing a country and saying, how can the industry support that national development? That was the basis on which our industry was shaped, the one that you have inherited. So this then translated into major changes in policy and how the industry was operated. And in 1969, this was converted into the Petroleum Act. In 1971, that date is wrong, it became the Petroleum Regulations. And out of that, the ministry developed a Systems and Procedures Manual. Now, those of you who are in operations understand the importance of systems and procedures. Understand why people implementing rules must have consistent ways of doing it, so that what is done can be checked, and what is checked can be reported upon. So that procedures manual is very important. Now, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Given what that 1963 mandate looked like, 1969, the act was passed. 1971, the regulations came into being. Between 1969 and 1971, 1970 was a year of social and economic upheaval in Trinidad and Tobago. People, by and large, didn't feel there was an equal distribution of the wealth of the nations. So that played, I suspect, into the way the regulations were written subsequently. As I go through this, I'll actually talk about some of the regulations that affect local content to show how that might have been the case. I'm just speculating, I don't know. Yeah. So as we went through the period of the 60s and 70s, the industry changed. BP left, Shell left, they went on to find greener pastures, but they left assets behind. They left producing fields. Shell had a refinery. They left people with skills. To sustain jobs and production, as the government had set out to do it in 1963, government invested in what BP's assets with Tesoro and formed what was first Trinidad Tesoro and then Trintopec, and then acquired Shell's assets and formed Trintop. And then the government, even back then, if you look at some of the terms of reference, focus on creating wealth from natural gas and not flaring natural gas. So I didn't give all the terms of all the questions and recommendations of the committee, but they did focus on adding value downstream, including then 1963 natural gas. Yeah. Back in the 70s, we had an eye on local content. Now you may recognize that in the 70s, we moved from mostly land-based production and Trinidad in the Gulf of area to East Coast production. That changed Trinidad's landscape. And let me explain what I mean by that. Up until that time, all the operations were based locally. All the leadership decisions, business decisions were made largely locally. The companies had a presence in country. When people came to work in Trinidad, they came by boat. They brought their families. They set up camps. They built churches, even graves and cemeteries. They came to live. They brought their knowledge. They brought their technology. They brought their procedures. We were able in Trinidad and Tobago to develop technology using micropaleontology. That Paleolab Point de Pierre was a world-leading institution. We were able to zone the tertiary in Trinidad and Tobago using that. People worked around these experts and learned from them, learned how to prepare samples, analyze them, and come up with stratigraphy. So doing work in country made a huge difference to Trinidad's ability to learn and do. In 1963, We also designed and built in Trinidad the biggest platform in the world, a 36-slot platform for Antilles Bright Marine that was built by George Wimpy. Subsequent to that, the Ministry of Energy engaged George Wimpy to ask, can we actually have a full-blown platform fabrication facility for the offshore East Coast? Now, I said Amoco coming in changed the game. Amoco had a brilliant series of activities, discoveries, capacity building in Trinidad and Tobago. But one thing was different in that Amoco operated or did a lot of work remotely. The engineering, a lot of the geosciences was done in Houston. So whereas they did hire locals, a lot of the knowledge and technology didn't transfer directly as easily. So their view was, we can't build platforms here, so let's build it in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, later on, we proved that to be wrong, but that was
We have lost you, Tony. Javed?
Hi, let's try. We're going to try to get him back. It looks like he dropped off the call because I think everybody else is still here. Let's give us 1 minute, please.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I'll call him. I'm calling. I'll call him because we're both on the same local phone system. Unless, of course, he has his phone on mute, which I suspect he does. But
okay, so just bear with us, folks, as we try to get him back.
In the meanwhile, everybody, if you guys have any questions you want to ask or comments you want to make, feel free to do so in the chat, and we can take the questions or the comments at the end as well.
yeah, Javed, it says he's trying to log back in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
I also would suggest while we're waiting, if you guys don't mind, if you don't mind typing in the companies that you represent or the organizations you represent, so we can have an idea of the different places that the audience is from. If you do wish to do so.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Tony, you're back.
Can you see my screen? I'm not sure. I can't tell. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, but we're seeing you. So you could try again, and you should be able to be back up and running.
All right. Back on. Let me back on. Let's see. Share screen. Find screen.
Tony, I'm seeing you in Houston.
All right. Let me go on. So the point I was making is that we went on in the 70s, and most of you are familiar with this natural gas vision, where we said we will take natural gas and add value to it. And the point is that we'll do it ourselves. We'll use locals to do it because nobody else seems to want to do it. So local content is in our DNA. It's been there. The government invested, took gas that the companies did not want from flare gas, created state companies, NEC, NGC, foreign leases companies, and invested in the downstream. We were adding value. We were local. Trinidad and Tobago, to this point, has a world-leading local content approach to the industry, and is doing really well. in all that time, we are building technical schools in San Fernando, in Port of Spain. We're developing a university in West Indies. We're training people. Businesses are getting work. We're doing what we need to do. Government even took money from a bid round, a signature bonus from Mobil, and handed it to Trinidad and said, we need to find more gas to grow the natural gas business. And Trinidad drilled an exploration well, which discovered the hibiscus field. So we've been investing in our people, in our businesses. Yeah. So come 2003, now we've gone through all the 80s natural gas, and we come to this big discovery in the 90s. We're going into LNG, and the question is asked, where does that take us? How do we refresh this vision of where we're going? And the country went into this approach of let's look at where we want to be as a country, and then we were asked, where do we want to be as a sector? Does that sector support national development? Back in the 60s, that's what we said. We ask it again. How do we support national development? So we created this local content, this Energy 2020 vision, and also that fed into a national vision for development. And then out of that came the local content policy for oil and gas that works for the sector but supports national development. And then that itself fed into 2020 vision implementation. So there's a national implementation that included local content. That was the way we tried to approach it when we were at the height of our natural gas monetization. That's where the policy came into being. Until then, we had legislation, we had regulation, as I'll show you, but the policy pulled it all together in this context. So this is what the policy said, and I won't read this. The policy says, let's identify where we want to focus. Let's make sure we select participants, engage them, and manage them in a way that gets what we want. Let's determine how we enable maximum local content. And then we said, let's do it in the way that gives the country the best benefit. Let's do it in country. Let's manage the pace and scheduling so that we don't run hot and cold. Let's give preference to locals. Let's make sure that those who come in are supporting us, can support us, and have a culture of doing that. And let's focus on the things that are important. Let's prioritize improving skills and improving wealth capture. And then let's ensure there's a mechanism for making sure this happens, for setting targets for monitoring. And that's where the government put in place this local content committee. So the policy hits all the right buttons, it says all the right things, it even identifies objectives and how to maximize benefits, it sets priorities, it started to set some targets, it didn't actually set targets then, but it was focusing on creating competitive businesses. So we have this policy, which is online at the ministry's website, anybody can have a look at it, it's out there. It set priorities. Set priorities around fabrication and the engineering that goes with that, seismic data management, and I'll give you a sense of why these things were selected, operations and maintenance, maritime services, and business support services. The idea here is we have in the country some of the best companies in the world. Not just the best oil companies, the best companies. Shell now, BP, Schlumberger, these are great companies. They have all best practices in businesses. How can our businesses learn from them and raise their game? So we went about it saying there are 3 levels of capacity building we want to go after to get the most out of this opportunity we have. First of all, we have to get jobs. So we have to train people, get them up to speed. Then we have to improve the quality of our businesses. So they must get the business skills and business support services they need. But then to really reinvest in the industry, other industries in the economy, you need to raise capital. So we build these 3 tiers of the world: learning operations, which we've done for a long time, and then moving into learning businesses. Once we have this, then we can really participate. We can get local content. That's what local content is. But if we stop there, that's all we would get. If we went on and then said, let's get, went the wrong way. Let's get money in the game. Let's learn to control businesses, learn to invest, get profits. Then and only then are we able to move from just oil and gas to other sectors. These are the things we need to build other industries: business know-how, business skills, operational excellence skills, risk management, the things we ask foreigners to come to bring, and capital. that allows us to transform the economy. Now, you might find this to be ambitious, but the fact of the matter is this was an opportunity back then that had a long duration. We were looking at field developments, if managed at the right pace, as the policy said, but have field developments going on to 2024. When it was written, we were all against a fourth LNG train. We said, let's draw this out so we can get benefit. Now, there are two reasons for that. One, we knew that if we did things too quickly, we'd exceed local capacity and have to push things outside of country, which happened. But we also knew in our hearts that our governments haven't got the capacity, our country doesn't have the capacity to spend so much money. And that led to other things. So the idea here was, let's manage the pace, let's transfer the knowledge and capabilities, and let's transform the economy. That's what this policy was about. Yeah. And then we were selective. We said, this sector has some characteristics along its supply chain that are desirable. Some of them bring money that one might just stay in the country. Some create jobs. Some create high-value jobs that can be transferred to other sectors. Some allow for innovation, bring innovation, and some allow for knowledge transfer. Some allow to transfer to other sectors. Some allow for locals to partner with foreigners so they can get more deep transfer. So this is how we went about picking where to focus. But we had to be selective again, and we decided that we can't do everything. So let's select these sectors that are sustainable, that will go on for a while, and will have high impact. So that's where those priorities came from. We said, let's focus on these. And we put these into production sharing contracts that came up, as you'll see. And we put them into the policy that was being run from the early 2000s up until about 2010, when money started coming in and priorities in the country changed. Okay? So how do you go about getting local content? You have to build capacity. You have to train people. You have to make sure that you do it in a strategic way, and I won't go through that. You have to develop suppliers. Of course, at the time, suppliers have limited technical know-how. Some are very, very good, have limited access to finance. Some needed the standards raised, needed new technology. So there's a lot of things needed to be done, and we put systems in place for that. But key to all this happening is that, one, locals had to be given a chance to participate, to get access to tenders. Two, the tenders had to be structured in a way that locals had a fair chance, a real chance, in terms of timing, in terms of the scope of the works, those kinds of things. And then, of course, the way that companies were hired and then how they were paid. So a lot of things went into how do you make sure you get good access by locals and make sure you get what you're trying. And key to all this is having somebody monitor, measure, and then make sure that those who are supposed to be following the rules, doing certain things, are doing it. These are the four components of the local content implementation strategy that the local content committee set out to oversee. What were we trying to do? Let's take it in steps. First step, if we have locals who can do work, make sure they got it. But not just get it, make sure that in doing it, they enhance the capacity. They get better, they get bigger. The second step was, since these companies are there are associated types of activities they may be able to get involved in. Let's give them the ability to expand, to invest in new assets, new capabilities. And the third horizon is, since you're working in Trinidad and Tobago for world-leading companies, let's make sure we find a way to make you global, to help you go overseas, to export goods and services. That's what this strategy was leading to, getting locals out of Trinidad and Tobago. Why? Because we knew Trinidad had a limited market. We knew that there wasn't always continuous work. You had to get additional work somewhere. That was the strategy. That strategy, like I said, was premised on a continuous pace of work and easy access, with a regulator taking charge of what was happening. So that brings me to who this regulator is and how it works. So this is the structure of Trinidad's legal and regulatory system, as we all know. At the top is the President, Judiciary, Parliament, Auditor General. These people on the left-hand side of this graphic are the agencies that oversee others below them. They put in place mechanisms of control. The ones at the top put in the constitution, laws, treaties. The ones in the middle, the operation, well, the policy level, put in regulations and different kinds of instruments to govern those. This is where the ministries come in. At the bottom are the operators, the ones who actually do procurement, capacity building, and supply of services. And these are managed by other instruments. The governance framework has these rules and control instruments. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we had, at independence, a very good, from 1969, a very good set of laws and regulations to manage local content. And I'll show you how that translated into contracts later on. Okay. But none of this works unless the coordinating agent is doing this in an accountable manner. In other words, you can put everything on the table, but somebody has to make it work. Okay. Quickly, this is how the sector's local content works in terms of the participant. The minister and cabinet have put in place this body called the Local Content Committee, the Permanent Local Content Committee. That committee reports to the cabinet and gets its support from cabinet. It also reports, it's supported by the minister, of course. The minister is the member who takes its work to the cabinet. It's also supported by the Ministry of Energy. Ministry of Energy is represented on the committee and reports to the committee. The committee has a secretariat, has been populated, has been hired, but it's in theory it's there. We have some people working in part-time. And the ministry is the one that regulates the sector. And as I'll show you, what the committee has done, has been doing, is providing support for the tools and procedures. I won't go into detail. Giving the ministry tools and procedures to make its work easy, to implement the existing legislation and regulation. One of the questions I was asked is, do we have legislation and regulations? And are they adequate? And I'll show you that actually we have some very strong legislation and regulations. What we haven't got is a strong regulatory approach. So here's what the Petroleum Act regulations and production sharing contracts have with local content. They've got definitions. They have instruments of control where the minister can compel companies to behave in a certain way, by his licenses, by his rules, by his orders. Under the laws and contracts, there are general obligations that cover certain things like transparency, accountability, monitoring, reporting. In other words, the minister has access to information to see how we're doing local content. And then there are specific conditions in how people conduct their business. To one, hire locals, train locals, procure goods and services, and add value to their produced material. That is very well built in. In addition, we have other legislation that supports local content capacity building. The Immigration Act has a work permit process that actually speaks to that. Okay. I'm not sure if you can see this. The text is a little bit smaller. I apologize for that, but I won't read it all. But the key point here is how the control mechanisms work. The law says, nobody shall engage in petroleum operations unless he first obtains a license, period. You can't operate unless you have a license. That's important for many reasons. One, the license then puts conditions which could be beyond the laws and regulations on how you operate. But in addition, the license requires that you must set up an office in Trinidad and have somebody living in Trinidad who accounts to the minister. What that means is that you're also paying taxes. It means your books are in country to be inspected. I will say it now and I'll repeat it. Most of the money is spent on third-party goods and services. The petroleum regulations require that contractors be licensed. At this point, no single contractor is licensed. Most of the money is spent, I suspect, on companies who don't even have a presence here. So whereas we're paying these companies to do work, we pay through the cost recovery. We don't tax them. And that's a big loophole in the tax system that we need to fix. Yeah. So the law also says the ministry should keep a register of all licenses issued. And to me, that's in keeping with the transparency aspect, this notion that we are a newly independent nation with sworn to a democratic way of government. So that transparency says everything that's happening in the sector should be seen by people. And it talks about all aspects of our license, from application to surrender. Okay. Now, the law says what kinds of companies need licenses. I highlight here petrochemical licenses because with all those companies we boast of in Point Lisas and Point 14, none of them except Save Atlantic, which is a different story, has a petrochemical license, which basically means they're unregulated. But don't quote me on that. But under the law, that's what regulates them: petrochemical license. With no license, how do you regulate them? And then the second part is that any contractor or agent shall himself have a license. Again, no contractor or agent has a license. And that creates massive loopholes in tax generation and accountability. I just mentioned some, there's some bigger ones. Yeah. And then between the act and the regulations, there are many, and I won't go through them, many articles that speak about how companies are meant to deliver local content, how the ministry is able to ensure that they're doing it through looking at their books, assessing them, and getting assurance that things are being done. So it speaks about keeping books in country, minimizing the employment of foreign personnel. It speaks about preparing programs of industrial and technical education, training nationals, and giving nationals every possible opportunity to occupy senior positions. So it speaks about capacity building, transfer of know-how, management, and skills across the entire business at all levels. And then the obligations in the regulations about the minister having the right to inspect all operations, to take copies of all records, all maps, all accounts, as to monitor. And then say, and this is a very far-reaching statement, the operator must have regard at all times in the conduct of operations to the public interest and to the rights and interests of Trinidad and Tobago. That's a very powerful statement that I've seen countries use very powerfully to get benefit to themselves. And then, of course, they must license.
We have lost him again, right, Javin?
Yes, I don't know why we lost him again. I guess if you don't mind, just give us about 2 minutes to get him back again. Not too sure why that's happening. Again, everybody, while we just wait for him to come back, if you don't mind asking your questions on chat, I see a couple already there, and a couple of people have introduced themselves, so we have an idea of the audience. I realize it's quite a broad audience today. Anita, I don't want to put you on the spot, but given that you are the new head of the local content committee, do you wish to say anything at this point while we wait until Tony to come back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, I really was hoping. Is he back?
Not yet, but you can give us a couple words in terms of your perspective.
Well, of course, it's always welcoming to get that historical development and the evolution of the local content in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, of course, we understand the importance of the regulations and the legislation. Getting that holistic appreciation for and ensuring what we need to do as a ministry, as the regulator, to ensure that we get the value for our resources, not only in the oil and gas sector, but also in the other sectors as well. And more importantly, for us as a country, what we need to do, to implement those regulations and the legislations, chief among them, the need for a stronger regulatory approach, as Tony was saying. And that is what we are working on. That is what we are striving to do. And I note in particular, it has always been a concern, for Tony with respect to the licensing of the contractors. So, we know it's a lot of work to be done. We understand that there are challenges. We are getting some kickbacks from the companies when we make, the requests for baseline data. So, as a committee, we are, trying at most to see how best we can get the data to assist us in analyzing, the whole local content scenario.
So, Anita, a question I have around COVID, and I guess we could have some of the discussion now in the event that Tony doesn't come back, or in the event that he takes a few minutes. I suspect that out of... Hello, Tony, are you there?
I'm here, but I can't see the...
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Okay, go ahead, Tony. I think you should be okay now. We were just having a little discussion waiting on you.
Can you see the screen now?
I
Can you see
think...
my screen?
Not yet, but I think it's loading.
Okay. Hey there? Tells me I'm sure.
Yeah, Tony, you're good to go.
Okay, good. So I'll go through this quickly, but the contracts reinforce and put more obligations on operators. So the ministry went down the road to really reinforce local content, getting the policy to focus on the things, focus on the contract to focus on anything the policy said. So these things are in place, and they've been reinforced in all aspects of local content that are in the law are now aligned to the policy here. So including things like, and this is important, the companies are obliged to train ministry personnel, so the ministry has a capacity, access, and the Petroleum Act makes provision for petroleum imposts that charges another levy on E&P companies to pay for the operating costs of the ministry. In addition, production sharing contracts have an additional charge line for the ministry's support. So the ministry has the ability to hire, train people. The industry pays for it, not directly out of the consolidated fund. The ministry can build the capacity to do its job. Yeah? And the things that we identified in the policy and in practice as companies having a challenge to get the local content were addressed in the contracts of 2010. So into how they procure, how they get paid, issues around late payment, 90-day invoices. These were addressed back in 2010. The ministry knows that and addressed them. The challenges we face are there. So when I say Trinidad has good aspects of local content, we did it really well back in the day, and the key there was doing it in country. Back in the time of the policy, we actually tried that as well. And we said, let's do it in country with the things we need. Let's have design engineering. Let's have seismic processing, seismic data management done in country. And we got 5 and 6 companies doing each of those. We got the technology brought in, we got the skills built, we built the businesses built. So we got it done in country. But what happened is that we didn't pursue it. We didn't continue with it. It was led to lapse. So all the things we need were being happening, all the monitoring and evaluation. So the impost I said is what pays for the people in the ministry. Everything is there. And the work permits and the Immigration Act says that no person shall work in Trinidad and Tobago in any profession, trade, occupation, unless there is enforced a relation for him a valid work permit, which is, that part didn't come, but essentially what that person needs to do is to make sure there's somebody understudying them who is trained to be able to take their role over time. So that's the key pieces of local content where we are. The questions I was asked was around where are we, what would be changed, how do we get better? What I showed you early on is that local content only happens when there are activities. In oil and gas, activities only happen in the upstream if we have resources under the ground. One of the challenges we face in Trinidad is that we have not had an active, national-driven approach to understanding our resource, finding out how much more oil and gas is there. What is there? How do we get it out more efficiently? How can we get it out? Back in the 50s, we had offshore operations. We were the second country in the world to go offshore, in Trinidad. And we built capacity around operating offshore in Trinidad. Then Amoco came in 69 and found oil in the East Coast. And that was a little bit deeper water. And we said, we haven't got the capacity. Let's get the foreigners to do it. And for 20 years, we behaved as if we couldn't ever do it. I never had a push to get local companies to go into the waters out there. Until, of course, Moravan came along, thanks to Krishna. But at this point, we're doing the exact same thing with deep water. We're saying we haven't got capability in deep water, so let's not bother to go there. You know what we did? Up until the 90s, every license, every contract had an equity share retained for the state. And the state would assign that to Petrotrin. Why? Because the state knew that the only way to build capacity is to participate. And because we owned 100%, we weren't getting any favors. We're telling investors, come in, earn a share by what you invest. We want to retain some share. The government took away that share from Petrotrin and kept it for itself, which creates two problems. Government has no operational capability. And two, it's regulating itself. So now we're not building any deep water capability for Trinidad and Tobago. And we're behaving as if we're never going to go there. So we haven't learned that lesson from the 70s in Amoco. It took us a long time to get into that. And similarly, we're not building capacity in operating gas fields. We have capability, but we're not building companies to do that. So there's a lot to do still. But a lot of that comes from us understanding what the reserves base is. That is where you geologists and geoscientists are so important. We need to do research, our research for ourselves in country using our data and technology. We can't depend on foreigners doing research to fit their corporate portfolio and priorities. We have people, we've trained people very well. You know, we need to do that research in country. We need to find out where there's more oil, and where there's oil, how to get more out. Where there's more gas, where there's small gas, where there's low pressure gas, where there's depleted fields, how to get those out. We have a lot of work to do. And in my view, a lot of oil to find and produce still. And to me, had we done what we needed to in local content earlier, better, we'd be better prepared. The question is, has that horse bolted? Is the stable empty? I don't believe so. I think we still have opportunities, but I think we need somebody to lead it and guide it. We need somebody to believe in it. And I really believe that most of the members of the society are quite young. And it's in your interest and to your benefit to take charge of this. And I need to see somehow the society step in and say, let us take a lead in shaping the future of this industry. Let us take a lead in shaping the future of local content, of local participation, of local research, of innovation, of transforming this economy. That's what we can do. That's what we should be doing. So with that in mind, I've touched on a few of the issues. I hope I've covered the main ones, but I want to leave something for the question and answer because I'm sure there's a lot more questions than I've answered. I've spoken quickly, I've spoken long. I want to thank you for listening and looking forward to your questions.
All right, Tony, thank you very much. And we can't really clap for you without making a lot of noise, but consider yourself a virtual clap. So there are a couple questions that some people put in the chat. So I'm gonna Leon, I don't know if you want me to go ahead or do you want to copy here?
No. Javed, you carry on. You've been doing a good job. So you keep going, right?
Okay, good. So I wanted to mention to you guys that we have had about 60 participants and they're more or less still online during this talk, Tony. And I see people from Trinidad, from Guyana, from Jamaica, from the US, from Qatar, from Mozambique. And so it looks like you have fans all over the world, right?
I get it.
So one of the questions I'm seeing here, the first question I'm seeing is from James from Shell. He's asking what skills in the energy sector do you think are most lacking local content, and do you think that we are still too reliant on foreign talent?
The biggest gap we have right now, actually, in terms of local content, is oversight, is governance, is regulation.
Tony, like he doesn't want to stay on to answer the questions. So for you guys who don't know, Tony's actually calling from Mozambique. So I don't know what kind of connection he has, but he seems to be disappearing on and off. So, but I think in the meantime, we could continue with having a little discussion, and anybody especially people who have worked at senior levels in the public service. Eric, Anita, and so on could probably help answer some of these questions or give some of your comments. Gemma from the local content committee and so on. Do you guys have any thoughts on what skills or particular jobs you think are lacking right now in local content? Let's use Trinidad as an example. Tony was saying governance, and I think he was going down the road of the regulator, but any particular jobs as well?
Tony is being diplomatic. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am. You can go ahead, Eric.
Back in the day when we did the local content policy in 2004, nobody wanted it. And it required a lot of twisting and a number of other things to get that, even to get the committee put in place to do the work. And it happens that the story may not be fully told, but both Tony and I had been aligned on local content for quite some time. And one day, one of us became the minister, and the other one was a consultant out and about, trying to get people to get into local content. At the time, we also tried to reorganize the ministry into a more modern organization. That failed for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that the new organization went against the culture of the current of the public service. But in the lead up to that process, and Anita, you need to hear this carefully, when the senior staff in the then ministry were polled on a number of things that the new ministry should do, they all felt that local content should not be in the Ministry of Energy, it should be elsewhere. And I have that documented. The companies didn't want it. They fought hard against it. The Work Permits Committee did not want it. In fact, I had to personally write the cabinet note to take to the cabinet to get the local content committee going. And in a situation where at that time, 70% of the work permits in the country were energy related. The means of analyzing work permits was made to be administratively inefficient at the time. One senior officer in the ministry was the only person who had the clearance to look at all work permit applications that were coming into the country. You know, it took quite a bit of doing. One of the things that drove us was that we saw, when we looked at the lead up to, Tony had just given a little bit of other history here. When we saw the lead up to train 1 of the LNG, we saw that the split between the the GDP and the GNI were separating, which suggested that capital was leaving the country at the time of foreign direct investment in major projects. And one of the other drivers that we were able to use to convince my then boss and others that this was something we should look at was the fact that money was leaving the country while we were doing developmental projects with foreign direct investment. So we said never again should that happen. And one of the key areas to stop that leakage of money was to redevelop the whole business of local content in the system. So I would say to you that at the time, we have learned, and Tony and I have been around the world giving speeches on this matter, that it takes leadership from the very top to make any of these things happen. And particularly when you're in a culture where people will align themselves with whatever the most senior person in the place sets as the goals. And I was also, I have to say, I benefited from listening to quite a lot of the people who put in place some of the earlier approaches to local content that Tony spoke of. And many of them were able to tell me that they themselves didn't have the vision for the gas business or for local content or any of those things. But it took the then Prime Minister who cleared the way and said, we must do these things. And he was effectively a benevolent dictator to cause a lot of these things to happen. So we have, I think, a lot of people, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but a lot of people who have great insight into what is required and very capable to deliver on the things that are required. But at the end of the day, you're faced with what they call real politics and the leadership skills to focus and break through to cause things to happen. Another thing, for instance, when we were putting local content in place, and I've said this again publicly, so I could say it again, I was faced with the fact that we had a treaty, a trade treaty between Trinidad and Tobago and at that time the United States that spelled out that we could not ask a US company to transfer technology or to adhere to local content requests from our side. And literally, I had to go to that particular capital and lobby to explain that we were not suddenly becoming anti-American, but that we were trying to build our country. So we are also faced with other international treaties that seek to stymie this whole business of local content and development. So back in the day, it was a bad word. Today, it's now used as a nice catchphrase. But when you dig down into it, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing? What are we doing? And I think, as Tony quite rightly pointed out, what we've started to focus on is, okay, so we have these resources and this and that and the other and the next. So it's not a question of all of those, but what are those resources going to do to help us develop as a people and as a country? And I think that's kind of the approach that we took back then. Some of it remained in place, but I would respectfully submit that I've seen now in, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in several countries, where unless you have buy-in from the very top of the country, that and certainly the senior players, that these things are not going to happen, or they're going to happen in a way that benefits anybody who is able to benefit. At this point, I become a diplomat.
Thank you very much, Eric, for your input there. And those of you all, Eric is a former Minister of Energy from Trinidad and Tobago. So Tony, Eric was helping you out there a little bit and answering some questions. We almost out of time, but I don't want to lose some of the key questions that we've been asked here. So one of the other questions here I see is, how do you suggest that we effectively plan for growth and maintenance given the volatile pricing right now that we see? I mean, so you talked about it being cyclical. Right now, investment and projects may start to decrease in the next few months, next few years. How do you see us planning for that, Tony or Eric?
Let me start by saying, can you hear me? We've been down this road before. It's not the first time we've had bottom of cycle activities. Back in the 90s, when we had this, the government very strategically, again, with help from the Society of Petroleum Engineers, went about this mission of convincing the government and the bankers that we can get local companies to work in the sector, that they can use idle assets, idle capability, idle people. And that's where the farm out program started to work. And that's where we formed these small local independents. We can do that, again, still better. So we have to think differently. But what we do now, at the bottom of the cycle, pricing and build capability that we can use otherwise. So I think there's ways to do it. We've been here before. Now, we have to also know is that as we go further out, how do we capture back the things we managed to lose in terms of getting locals involved in the value chain, the operators who are here now, collecting the taxes that we've let slip over all these years. A lot we can do, but we have to be thoughtful. And it comes back to what got us here in the first place. We have to be analytical. We have to get the data, analyze it, understand it, use it.
So Tony, a lot of the questions have a similar theme in that they're asking about what is missing right now. And I think from what we've seen in the discussion, the laws and the policy is not really a problem or has many problems in it. It is well thought out and well understood quite a long time ago. The issue right now that we're facing is that we do not have a strong local content regulator. The aspect of the Ministry of Energy that governs local content is quite, and I hope Anita and they could chime in, is probably understaffed and under-resourced and unable to actually fulfill their requirement.
You know, Trinidad is a small country, and we'll always have challenges with resources, people, and so on. You know, one of the challenges we face really is the quality and capability of government generally. Now, when we came into this oil and gas game, we were a poor nation. Our mission was to create wealth, to get revenue, to get jobs. When we got into the local content policy and the gas money started coming in the early 2000s, we moved from that. And the focus moved from creating wealth, frankly, to spending money. You know, and we took our eye off the goose that was laying the egg. You know, and we let that go into abeyance. So it's about realigning ourselves as a country, understanding what we have to do, and getting somebody to talk to keep that train on track. And that's where I think we went off track. So if you can find a way to get the politics right, to get the policy making right, to get the governance right, not just the ministry is a symptom of a bigger picture about governance breakdown.
So Tony, I want to ask a question and put it out there, right? Does COVID give us an opportunity to look at local content through a new lens? Now that travel around the world and the ability of a lot of expats and foreigners to work in different countries may not be as simple anymore, does it give us a new opportunity here?
But, you know, a friend of mine asked me that, and I gave the analogy to independence. And I said, why did we get independence? It was because after the war, Britain, the colonial power, was bankrupt. And they couldn't look after us anymore. They couldn't afford it. So they said, take it. And we very thoughtfully said, let's look back and see what hadn't happened to us well, and let's fix it. Now, with COVID, a lot of the investors are in a similar problem. Some of them will leave, cut back, give up assets potentially. So we have to ask, so if we have this thing in our hands, how can we be thoughtful in using it going forward? We shouldn't think only of what to do now here, but what the global scenario allows us to do or creates first, which is what the 1963 Commission looked at. What is our position in the global marketplace? So I think we have to look at COVID as an opportunity if you want to get out of it. Sure, we have to deal with the issue right now. That's a priority. But somebody in parallel has to be thinking about a priority, about an opportunity to take us out of that. The world has changed. The investor has changed. The investor needs have changed. Priorities have changed. How do we take on that role? And that's something we have to think about. There are things we can do. We should be putting off down the line. We know locals haven't been paid regularly on time by many companies, suppliers. We know that a lot of assets have been let to go. There's work to be done to fix them, wells to be drilled and fixed. We have locals who can do that. Let's put a program in place to employ locals and local companies in the sector to do the work that needed to be done that have been put off for a long time.
Tony, as an example of that, I heard, and I'm not sure if it's correct, one of the rigs that is drilling in Trinidad now couldn't get all of its expat staff in. So they said that they had to use locals. And a question that would come to everybody's mind is, well, why weren't you doing that before? If you could have, right? And I'm sure that extends to many different areas. What I want to put out to everybody listening is that most of you all here work in different companies in different countries and may have influential positions, and please lobby internally to your multinationals or your local companies to see how we could, one, employ more locals, but also pass on good training and so on. For example, as a multinational operator, BP or Shell, local content might not only be hiring people, it might be training and helping subcontractors or potential subcontractors to develop their own systems, which allows them to be more competitive. So it's more than one way to go about local content, I think.
Well, actually, Javed, capacity building includes supply chain development, which includes supporting your suppliers to get better. That's all great companies invest in the supply chain. I've seen those same companies in Alaska, in Aberdeen, in Gulf of Mexico, send people in to help their suppliers build systems and procedures, improve operational efficiency. They do it. they invest in the supply chain because that's where they spend the money. That's where they want to get the most efficiency improvement. So helping suppliers improve is not a favor that companies do to the suppliers. It's good business for them. But there's two situations where it's either required or it's in their own interest.
Absolutely. And guys, so with that, we just about 10 past 1. I'll give a final minute or two if anybody wants to ask or make a comment. If you want to unmute your mic and make a comment, anybody, you can feel free to do so as we wrap up. All right, if nobody has any questions, just remember that this topic does not end here. Feel free to reach out to the GSTT or any of the members. I think Tony may make his slides available at some point for us to go through. And I think it's really important that we understand the history that we come from since independence, all the things that we've done right, because we've done a lot right. And we've done a lot of things that we probably should not have as well. And there's a lot of time, there's probably a lot of opportunity left. The horse is not completely gone from the stable, but it's probably partially away outside. I think there's a lot more to be done. And really, Tony, we really appreciate the work that you and Eric and others have done in developing local content, not just in Trinidad, but apparently all over the world. You guys have been pushing for different governments to advising them accordingly. So we definitely appreciate that. You and Eric are two of the exports, I guess, from Trinidad that you have been talking about.
Javed, may I say something, please?
Sure, you may. You may.
Sure, I just want to follow up on a comment. When I came back into the room, I heard you called up my name. The question was, what are we doing, where the gaps in capability? And basically when the committee was constituted by cabinet in 2016, they were given mandates, and I think those mandates were given in 2004 as well. And in 2016 they were given mandates, and based on those mandates and the policy, the local content policy, the PLCC then developed a work program or work plan or work program in order to implement local content. And one of the things that's captured there is capability, to assess capability, the capability gap. And in order to do that, one of the things that the committee has actually developed is a suite of local content surveys, and it's intended for the operators to do this. And it's the survey will be administered by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry, because the PLCC, what they have been mandated to do is to build tools, processes, and guidelines to assist the ministry in actually delivering as the regulator. So this has been done, and based on the feedback from the survey, and then based on feedback from the operators on their long-term, short, medium, and long-term plan, you get the demand. So we have another tool that has been developed, will be developed as well, is a supplier database. So what you need to look at is the supply and demand, and one versus the other, you actually get the gap in capability, and it has to be done by analysis, basically.
Thank you, Gemma, for your comments. And I just wanted to note for everybody listening that the Local Content Committee, while small, has had a couple of workshops last year where they engaged several hundred contractors in Trinidad and operators to talk about opportunities and developing this database and to help those suppliers be better aligned to provide services. So the committee is active on the resource possibly, but they are active, and I'm sure they would appreciate our assistance or comments or help in any way.
Yes, Javed. Anita here, if I may.
Sure.
Right. So I listened carefully to what Eric had said. I also listened carefully to what Tony continues to say. I mean, I understand that there needs to be to be buy-in from the top. So what I'm getting is we can have all the regulations and legislation, and without the buy-in from the top, the challenge for local content development will continue. And once we get that buy-in, the whole issue of under-resourced and understaffed will be a non-issue. So, and if I could tie it back into what Gemma had just said with respect to the mandate of the reconstituted committee of 2016, we would have noted from just yesterday we had a subcommittee, a COVID subcommittee of the local content committee. And what we have recognized that notwithstanding or despite the mandate of the 2016 reconstituted committee, there was no sort of consideration was given for matters of unseen events such as COVID. So this in itself posed, an awakening for us, as it were. So as we continue to develop, mandates and, for whatever reasons, we need to take into consideration, unseen events. And that speaks, it sort of brings us to a point where we need to revisit our mandate in the context of treating for, unforeseen events. So that is all, that's my added contribution.
All right, thank you very much.
And Javed, before I go, I hope I'm not the last speaker, but I just want to say to members of the GSTT, take the time to go to the Point Lisa's website, Clipdeco. Buried in there is something called the Point Lisa story. And I think it might be useful to take the time to read that, to see how we got into the gas business. It's a story that was put together at I think it was the 25th anniversary of the creation of Point Lisa's, and most of the people were still alive and they were interviewed. Not all of the private things that some of them told me are in there, but the general gist of it. And I think it might be useful, please, to go back and look to see how it is Trinidad and Tobago got into the gas business.
Sure.
Thanks, Eric. Good advice.